We talk about how we plan to win, and it starts with a fast start. Obviously, we didn't do that on either side of the ball, but we talk about winning the middle eight, and that's the last 4 minutes of the second quarter, the first 4 minutes of the third quarter, and they were able to, compartmentalize and focus on what was ahead of them. Took advantage of the opportunity. We were able to score, a couple points there and cut it to, I think 14-6, right? And then we knew that they were going to get the ball, that we needed to create some momentum in the first 4 minutes of the third quarter. Just super proud of the guys overall because they accepted the challenge. We knew that BC was going to come in here and they were going to try and start fast, and they did. And we allowed some of it with just some uncharacteristic mistakes, but they found a way to persevere through it. They didn't get down. They didn't start pointing fingers. They all looked at themselves in the mirror and said, "Hey, we're going to figure out what it takes." And just super proud that for the last 43 minutes they were able to keep them out of the end zone. Guys in the locker room are buying into what we're trying to build as a program, and they're learning how to win close games. They're learning how to win four-quarter games, and so I believe it just shows that the foundation that we laid in those first 2 years is starting to produce some results. But we're far from where we want to be. There's still things that we got to get better at, but you got a locker room and a staff that believes in each other, and they're willing to go to work every single day because they believe in what we're trying to build, and which is the model program. And we believe that Virginia, at the University of Virginia, man, the standards should be high in everything that we do on and off the field.
And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. You just heard from Tony Elliott. That was during his post-game press conference to that big comeback win against Boston College, talking about how big of a win that was. Another culture win for the Cavaliers. He said almost exact same thing after that Wake Forest win on the road, another comeback win. So that's 2 comeback wins for UVA, and something that Noah Josie even told us this week during player availabilities. He said this team would not have been able to accomplish this last season. Last season teams could not win these comebacks, could not win these close games, but this is a different squad. So we're going to go talk a little bit of Boston College, but then obviously turn the page and move over to Louisville on this show. At the end of the show, we're also going to touch on a little bit of the basketball scrimmage that occurred last weekend. Obviously, you can see the sights and sounds on Wahoo's 24/7. But before we get going there, why don't you go ahead and like this video, like this channel, and leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast. That way we will continue to be able to bring you the show. And also go ahead and check out Wahoo's 24/7. We have in-depth coverage from a lot of different Virginia sports. We also have coverage coming up from the Louisville game. We'll have a lot of post-game conference. The week after, we will be going to Clemson to cover Virginia's game at Clemson, which was the first time Virginia head coach Tony Elliott will be back to Death Valley since leaving Clemson to coach Virginia. Obviously, remember, he was the offensive coordinator at Clemson, and obviously we'll be counting down to Virginia's basketball season. So a lot of stuff is going on. A lot of stuff is also happening recruiting with Virginia once again, hosting a big recruit on grounds, as it seems like. I've been repeating myself. So when it comes to the recruiting visits, they're hosting one of the best players in the 2026 class. So a lot of good news coming on that front as far as who is making their ways on grounds, and all that is on Wahoo's 24/7. So before we move on to talk about Louisville, you have to talk about Boston College and that comeback win, because when you look at that game, you see that Virginia once again had a slow start. There still hasn't been a revelation in how to change that. They did have a slow start, but just like Coastal Carolina and just like Wake Forest, you see in-game adjustments, which is what you need to see, right? So when you look at the game, you saw them adjust a little bit in the game. And that's the reason when Coastal Carolina, what I liked was when they realized that they couldn't get the passing game going, they went and tried to get that run game going, and they did. And then against Boston College, they were successfully get those dirty runs from Kobe Pace. And then by doing that, they opened the passing game. The big thing for me was defensively, those adjustments and stopping Boston College from continuing to dominate the middle of the field was able to get the offense time to set themselves and also not going for the big plays. That was one thing that when you see Virginia early on in this game, in the season, with Anthony Calandria, possibly going for those big explosive plays. And that's something that a young quarterback will eventually learn, but going for those, just moving the chains, get yourself on schedule. Don't put yourself in positions of being 3rd and 18, 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12. Get those 3rd and 2s. Just how Boston College was able to control the game at first was because they were ahead of schedule. They were not putting themselves in this third and long positions like Virginia was early on. So that was good to see, is the ability to do that and not think because you're down 14-0, you have to reach for that big touchdown, getting those points on the board. And the other flip side, I did like the fact that Tony Elliott went for that touchdown rather than the field goal early on when they were down, because that shows that they're not playing conservative as much anymore. They believe in the talent that's on the field, which means you're going to bring that confidence, which means those players will believe that they can come back. It's all kind of that circular, everything kind of feeds off each other. It probably is a better way of saying it. So that was good in my opinion, showing that aggressiveness. It's the second game in the row that you saw that aggressiveness against Coastal Carolina. You know, Xavier Brown said it last week. It builds off confidence when you can do that. So in that game, we saw several good plays from, Jonas Sanker. He's probably one of the best defenders on this team. He's showing the integral part that he plays on this defense. Antonio Clary, up until his injury, was also crucial for this game. You saw Cam Robinson and his athleticism and what he brings in that middle of that field. Caleb Hardy coming in for Antonio Clary. He's going to play a bigger role this week for Virginia, obviously, with Antonio Clary out. So having him back there with the experience he had last year, he is pretty solid in pass coverage, and I think he's going to be a good asset to that defense. So having him back there is also going to be good for the Cavaliers, because, and that's actually a feature I'm writing for Friday, is that last year when we were talking about injuries, Virginia did have next man up theoretically, but those guys didn't have experience. Those guys didn't, these were guys that they didn't want to play early. They wanted them to sit, get experience, of course, but honestly use the year in college. But now you have a lot of different positions that other guys were able to step up in injury circumstance. Cam Courtney stepped up for Chris Tyree and Sudarian Harrison. Jaden Gibson also stepping up in the slot, moving Tyler Neville into that slot role as well. Obviously tight end, but he can go into that slot, adding him there as well. On the defensive line, having Anthony Britton step up for Jason Hammond. These things weren't there last year, which is the reason why those injuries hurt them more. Caleb Hardy having more experience this year will be beneficial for Virginia. Antonio Clary does have those intangible leadership things that is going to be missed, and I think he's going to be actually missing in the run defense, just because of his strengths and reading the field and just his quickness and tackling ability. They're going to miss him a lot. I mean, I think, on Pro Football Focus, he's probably the third ranked player on defense according to their grading. I think he's either in the top, I know he's top 5, but I think in top 3, and we're going to actually talk a little bit about grades here in a second. So he is definitely a loss, but at least you have a talent like Caleb Hardy there that they can rely on. So they do have guys stepping up. Kendron Smith was another one that stepped up for Virginia last game when Kempton Shine had to leave because of a knee injury. Kendron came in and undoubtedly had a great game. I mean, he had a pass breakup, one of the first plays for him, and then he had a pass breakup. And honestly, Boston College wasn't going for one-on-one matchups with him. Their plan was to go one-on-one with Jam Jackson, but Kendron Smith did a good job, and they kind of switched sides. And I think Kendron Smith held his own there. So he did a solid job for his. I think the game that he's played the most snaps in. So again, this wasn't what had Virginia last year. I mean, even at the wide receiver room, I mean, that was a lot of injuries for that receiver room. But then you had J.R. Wilson step up. You had Andre Green Jr. step up. So these are the differences from Virginia last year to this year as well. And you can even saw that in the O-line. You had Jack Whitmer coming in, and obviously Mikhail Boley back. And both of them are in the top 10 according to Pro Football Focus in this year for how well they're being graded. And actually, most of the offensive line starters are among the 10 best offensive grade just because of how they're doing in the run game. So a lot of good things moving forward for Virginia. And obviously that fight of coming back is just an extra level to it. So moving forward to that Louisville game, we obviously have to talk about injuries. There's a lot of injuries this week for Virginia. A lot of them are still day to day. And also of note, because of the Hurricane Helene up in North Carolina, I actually got this information because of my son's endocrinologist. The plant that makes, I guess, the IV bags got hit, which produces, I believe, 60% of the supply for the United States. That got hit in Helene, which is kind of affecting the supply chain. So with that, there's going to be a possible shortage of IVs in the United States. So they're being really particular on who can get those right now. It's mostly for emergency situations. So there's a delay in some elective surgeries. So that's why you're seeing some of these injuries kind of delayed a little bit from what I can gather. So just from going from what my child's doctor was talking about and what we're hearing through what Tony Elliott said, it was because they don't have additional resources for certain procedures. So that's why Carson Gay's surgery has been delayed. They're still awaiting MRIs on Chris Tyree. They believe it's a groin injury, but they wanted to wait for that result. So they don't want to push him because that can make it into hernia. So he's expected to be out, but again, it depends on when that results come in. Antonio Clary still waiting for his MRI scan. It is a knee injury. After the game last weekend, they mentioned that Antonio Clary had a knee infection on one knee and then hurt his other knee. Now, if you watch the game against Boston College, a lot of people pointed to the celebrations, but it's actually a couple plays earlier. You see him and a Boston College guy kind of collide a little bit from what it seems like. And then he kind of had to get treatment on the field. And I think that's where the actual injury happened, except he tried to play through it. And obviously he couldn't do so in that second half, and he left and went to the locker room. So he's not expected to play. Dakota Twitty is out. This is after he had that tackle hit, the targeting tackle with him. So he's expected to be out as well. Terrell Harris remains day to day. They're hopeful that he'll be back. It's about a pain tolerance thing for him. He's been limited at practice. So again, it's how he kind of feels towards the closer to the game as far as if he was able to play or not. Cedarian Harrison has had a hamstring injury. Excuse me, I can't talk. He had a hamstring injury. He remains also day to day. He's back at practice. It's one of those where if they need him, he'll probably likely play. But again, they have enough at the slot receiver as well. So that's one to look out for. He is day to day before the game. Kempton Shine is expected to be back. Again, Kendron Smith kind of filled that role, like I said earlier, for him, but he's expected to be back. But the way Louisville plays with their pass attack, I'm certain that you're probably going to see more than just Kempton Shine and Jam Jackson out there. I would be shocked if you didn't see Kendron Smith, especially because Dre Walker is expected to be out for a few more weeks there. So he's another one that you're watching. And then because Dakota Tweedy is expected to be out, because Sage Ennis is out for the season, and Takai Kirby is dealing with a shoulder injury, you might see John Rogers, a freshman tight end that, Des Kitchings and Elliott said that they probably would like for him to be slowly introduced to college football and possibly even redshirt this year. But because of the injuries in that room, they went to having so many tight end bodies to just having two experienced guys in Neville and Sackett Wood. John Rogers may be called into the game because they do like to play 12 personnel. So you would like to have 4 or 5 tight ends ready to go. So you would imagine John Rogers will be a guy that might factor in there. And obviously the big news this week also is Malcolm Green not entering the transfer portal because he officially can't enter the transfer portal until later in the year, but speaking to the staff about his intention to redshirt so that he can enter the portal and have one more year of eligibility. That's not whenever you have a guy do that, there's also a possibility he's always coming back just because they're not officially left. So I always say that. But as of right now, he is intended to redshirt and enter the portal once portal opens later on this year. So that secondary is getting pretty thin when you consider that injury as well. You consider that news about Malcolm Green and the injuries that Virginia is dealing with at those positions of Antonio Clary and Dre Walker, 2 guys that aren't expected to feature coming this week.
Things down, Calandra shouldn't feel pressed that he's got to make every play, right? Take some reads off of him, if we can hand the ball off and methodically, get some chunk plays, some 4-yarders, even a 3-yarder is really good. And we've shown growth in that department. Got to continue to get better. That's across the board, even the running backs not missing a run, really everybody being efficient, right? Regardless of who's in the game. And we're starting to, kind of gel in that fashion. Play call is still the same, right? Our protection rules and schematically, right? None of that's really changed. I think, like you said, it's the guys growing up and just taking a little bit more ownership in it, the strain, right? And the technique. Again, it's, when you look at it, right? Coaching and accepting coaching, applying the coaching, and having Coach Heff now for 18 months, right? And just that continued process of doing the drills, right, over and over and over, applying that to game day. that's shown up. The quarterback's done a decent job of not allowing sacks either, by either getting the ball out of his hands or, escaping. So everybody plays in that. Receivers are doing a better job of, beating the coverage, right? We talk about everybody's tied into it together in protection, right? As a wide receiver, my job is to understand that I'm trying to run my route to beat the D-line. I'm in a sprint versus the D-line, right? Because they're trying to get there to the quarterback. I got to get open. So all that together has attributed to that.
So good thing Virginia has been able to establish that competitive depth with those injuries. And I asked Tony Elliott because when you talk to the staff, at signing day, the last few years, and just leading up to that, they always mentioned that they always want a big competitive depth. I mean, Kevin Downing said it during his interviews in the preseason. He said, listen, I was challenged. I needed to create competitive depth in this offseason. So they talked about that a lot. So when you look at where they are now compared to last year, I asked them, how do you feel them creating competitive is going? Do you feel like they are where they need to be?
Still in that building stage, right? Because not every position is at that competitive depth stage yet, right? Because of where we are as a program, you got some older guys, and then you still got some freshmen that you're trying to grow up. So I think collectively we're better than we've been in the 3 years that we've been here as a staff, but still not where we desire to be, because you want to have competitive depth at all positions. That just it helps the guys to improve. That's really the only way you get better, to be honest with you, is to have competitive practices. And because we have more depth, we're able to be more competitive on the practice field, which I think is translating to more results on the field.
Well, it definitely feels like there's been improvement in building that. And I'm actually going to pull up a couple of these offensive grades and defensive grades from Pro Football Focus. And one thing that you can kind of jumps off the page is Xavier Brown is number one as far as grading when it comes to the offense. He's graded at 82.2. I mean, after you get 171 yards rushing against Coastal Carolina, I could see why you're graded number one. But it also showed against Boston College, where in the first half, you had one carry and he had one catch in the first half. When he came on in the second half, he might not have as much as carries as, probably would have wanted. And even like Tony Elliott says, we need to find a way to get him more the ball. But at the same time, when he's on the field or when he shows his ability, he just sparks that offense. He's shown now that he's the guy that can spark the offense. And you can see it when he's there. He's able to find the holes. He's able to follow his blockers really well. And he's just got great vision. Well, Kobe Pace is going to pound you. And sometimes he does take one or two steps, a little more steps, but eventually he will pound and he will get those dirty runs that you need, those 1 or 2 yards. Xavier Brown has the potential to be explosive. So Virginia knows that Xavier Brown could be a difference maker on the offense, and you saw that against Boston College. When you look in the second half, you saw that he sparked that comeback. Anthony Colandrea is number 2. And then I mentioned it. I said that the offensive line was doing really well for Virginia this season. I know that they're the first ones that you call out, but going to Pro Football Focus and just watching them, you realize that they're doing much better job this year, especially with the run game. So you have Noah Josie, we have Blake Steen, Noah Josie, Brian Stevens, all at 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And then you have Jack Whitmer at 9 and Mikhail Boley at 10. So you've got several of those offensive linemen in that top 10 in Pro Football Focus. And then you have Tyler Neville at number 7. I mean, he's been a great addition for Virginia on that offense. He averages 16 yards per catch. He's been a good asset in blocking and run protection. So yeah, Virginia has a number of guys that have done well for them, and you see the improvement. I mean, you have Mikhail Boley and Jack Whitmer listed in the top 10. If that doesn't show you about competitive depth and where they are in this team, I don't know what to tell you. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Antonio Clary is number 2. So he was in the top 3. Kent Butler is number 1 with 78.9. Antonio Clary was a 77.0. Jonas Sanker and Kempton are tied at 4th with 71.7, with Corey Thomas at 3rd. So Ethan Minter is number 6 there. Obviously, he hasn't played that many games. He played with 2 games with 17 snaps. But kudos to the freshman for when he does play, he's taking those opportunities. That's something that the staff says. If you're going to play, take those opportunities and do well. And you can see that Ethan Minter is one of those guys that has. Cam Robinson is up there in the top 10. So was Malcolm Green when he was able to play. And Caleb Hardy in his game that he played with significant reps this week, he's already in a top 11. So you can see again, and Trey McDonald, number 13, Kendrick Smith, number 14, all these guys, Kendrick Smith, 64.8. While Trey McDonald's up there in the mid 60s. So you see these guys, they're building competitive depth where some of these guys are stepping in and helping. And that's been the difference this season. It's the reason why they've been able to establish the run game. When you look at Virginia's offense, the reason why they're able to do these comebacks is because Virginia was able to run the ball. And Xavier Brown and that offensive line has been able to really propel that. And that's, again, building competitive depth. But then on defense, you're having guys stepped up to make those big plays, like Jonas Sanker, Antonio Clary, Malcolm Green back in the Wake Forest game. Antonio Clary, honestly, like Malcolm Green made that fumble, but Antonio Clary is the guy who got that 50-50 ball. You have guys on defense making those plays, and you have guys pressuring the quarterback when they're not getting as many sacks as you probably still want, but they're still being able to fill those gaps better in the run defense. So these are the reasons why. So this is the difference there with Virginia making those run games. And Tony Elliott said, if they continue to make a run game like that, they're creating the identity, and that's how they can open. Well, we're going to start talking about Louisville because that is the next game up. It's going to be a kickoff at 3:30 p.m. at Scott Stadium, another big ACC game for them that they hope will be their 5th win of the season and then 1 game away from bowl eligibility. So they hope to win at home, considering, again, I'm going to be talking about this a lot. The next third has 4 games, four tough games with 3 of them on the road. So they would like to get some momentum at home in this third of the schedule moving forward. So obviously they'll have Louisville here at home. It's going to be a tough matchup for them when it comes to the passing game for Virginia. Louisville has a really good passing attack led by wide receiver Jacquie Brooks, is one of the guys that, last week I mentioned Lewis Bond would be that one-on-one matchup that you would have to monitor. And we saw that a little bit. You saw Lewis Bond was able to get a few of those guys, and Morales was another one. You saw them winning those one-on-one in space of a couple of times, them being alone and wide open. Now for Louisville, you're not looking so much for their run game, because that thing with the Boston College, Virginia was able to hold them with 7 yards rushing in the second half, which is quite remarkable. They took away that and made them one-dimensional. Louisville is basically their passing attack. So they know what they want. They want to just throw the ball and get 15 yards per play. So I guess they're one-dimensional in itself, but so it's really about that passing attack, which is why missing Antonio Clary, although he's going to be a loss for them, I do think if Louisville was more of a threat on the ground, I'll be more worried about that loss. Still a big loss, but I think when Louisville's main threat is in the air, it's not going to be as big of a loss, because I think Caleb Hardy is a good safety back there. So Brooks is their lead wideout. He's also the ACC's leader in receiving yards per game with 97.8 and receiving touchdowns in 6. He also ranks 2nd in yards per reception with 23.8, with his longest receptions being 86 yards on the year. So Kempton Shine, Jam Jackson, likely starters, and obviously Kendrick Smith is going to come back. It's going to be the battle to watch for Virginia there. And in the trenches, you're looking at Tramiel Logan and Ashton Gillott going against Mikhail Boley, Jack Whitmer, and Blake Steen, because Virginia is still expected to kind of give Steen and Boley some rest with Whitmer. That's a good thing about creating competitive depth, is that you guys get there and rotate guys in there. On the other side, the battle to watch is Malachi Fields against corner Corey Thornton. That's going to be one of the Virginia will probably be putting that one-on-one target there for Virginia. And I obviously know the basics of Louisville, but that's why after the break, we're going to bring Michael McCammon from CardinalAuthority.com. He's going to come on. He's going to break down what has Louisville done this season. What are the main issues that they're facing? They're on a 2-game losing streak, but also what are the things that they're worried about? And also what's different. Virginia took Louisville pretty close over there at Louisville. There were a couple of controversial calls that could have turned tide a little bit differently. So what has changed for Louisville this season compared to last year's? And so Michael McCammon is going to answer all those questions. So we're just going to take a quick break. And then on the backside, you'll have Michael McCammon join the show. And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. And as I mentioned right before the break, we were going to have a special guest in the second half of the show, Michael McCammon from CardinalAuthority.com. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Appreciate the invitation.
Well, it feels like Louisville and Virginia have been kind of playing pretty close from last year to this year. It feels like, although the spread is a little bit bigger, it feels like this could be a little bit of a close game too. What is your early vibes of your expectations of this matchup?
To be honest with you, I was a little surprised when the spread came out, just because of how Louisville has been kind of playing poorly lately, especially on the defensive side of the ball, on both sides of the ball, but more so on the defensive side. And Virginia is obviously, one of the surprise teams, I would think, so far in the ACC season. So that spread kind of took me a little bit by surprise, especially since the Cardinals are going to be on the road. And that's a game that it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem like what season it is that we often will get some, a close ball game out of it, despite what the spread may be. So I think Louisville's got to go into Charlottesville. They've got a lot of things. Jeff Brom, when he had his press conference to start the week, basically kind of defined this week as we got to fix ourselves. So I'm not sure when they finally turned on Virginia tape and all that to start focusing on somebody else, but Louisville's got a lot to write. And I think if they can't, then this is going to be certainly a ball game that, Virginia certainly could take if Louisville continues to play sloppy.
Yeah, Louisville's coming in on a 2-game losing streak, losing 2 close matchups against Notre Dame and SMU. What was the 2 differences in the game? I know it looks like they started slow there.
Yeah, well, there's a few unfortunate common themes for Louisville so far this year, and one is a running quarterback, which Virginia fans will love to hear. It's in their last couple of games, in part because of the running quarterback. It seems like whatever they have game planned for to get started, be it Notre Dame or SMU, and really you can go back to Georgia Tech as well, even though Tech didn't start off as hot as those two. The running quarterback certainly gave the Cardinals trouble on that one. But it's like, I did a podcast earlier and I said Louisville's defense on those first series was kind of like a hot knife going through butter. I mean, we've heard that phrase forever, and that's kind of what it was. It's kind of like they weren't even existent on those opening drives for the Irish, and it just seemed like they weren't ready. They were taking longer to get ready for the snap, and the opponent's taking advantage of it and moving a little bit quicker. So it just comes out to where it looks like Louisville's not ready to face what they should have been preparing for all week long. And then come late second quarter and then in the second half, they seem to figure things out a little bit with the mobile quarterbacks. But yeah, a mobile quarterback and just not being ready, it seems, has been really what has plagued Louisville the last couple of weeks.
Now, when I watched back the game last year against, Louisville, and obviously you mentioned about mobile quarterbacks, Calandria was able to run the ball pretty effectively, and that's one of the reasons why the game was close. But it feels like the defense is a little different for Louisville, like just seeing that they were a little bit 5-man down. This year they're playing with 2 high safeties. Is that something that you've noticed, that defense is different, how their scheme is? Is that one of the things you've noticed?
Yeah, there's a number of things defensively that we've noticed, and a lot of it, and it was kind of interesting. The moment that the SMU game ended and Jeff Brom walked into his post-game press conference, he was basically pointing the finger at himself. And if his coaching staff was in the room, he was been pointing the finger at all of them as well. And it kind of seemed like it was kind of in particular defensively. They've had everything from, why are they schemed like that on this down? Why are we not blitzing in this situation? Why do we just have 10 men on the field, get another guy on the field, and he's in the backfield of the opposing team when the opposing team? So it's been a collection of really, coaching miscues. I mean, that's basically what Jeff Brom's blamed it. He put the blame on the coaching shoulders, on the shoulders of their coaches for not having the right plan and not moving it more effectively, as well as, not communicating it as well to the entire defense. So, for the last 2 games, I would say that the blame really does focus more on what's happening on the sidelines, at least defensively, as well as up in the press box, and how it's being communicated to the players. Something you shouldn't see this far into the season, I think.
Well, on the flip side, Louisville's offense, I think, has some of the best playmakers on that side of the ball, including probably one of the best wide receivers in the conference. With Virginia having some injuries on the secondary and being pretty thin there, I feel like that is probably the key matchup on Louisville's side, is to try to get those one-on-one matchups with Virginia's, corners.
Yeah, it's crazy. You think back in the last game, yeah, quarterback Tyler Shuck had 300 yards passing. Freshman running back Isaac Brown had over 100 yards rushing, and Ja'Cory Brooks, the wide receiver you're referencing there, had over 100 yards receiving, and they ended up losing that game. To speak to Ja'Cory Brooks, transfer from Alabama his first year at Louisville, and he's become Tyler Shuck's favorite target without question. But what's been even more impressive is some of the catches that he's making. I mean, he had one a few games ago against Georgia Tech where he was just banged all over the place, forced him into a 360 going down the sideline. Flag essentially was thrown over his head while he's continuing to track the ball, and he catches it. And we've seen him make those type of plays week after week after week. And they've got a number of other, talented wide receivers. Colin Lacey is one they had really big hopes for coming in. He had a broken collarbone in the team's last scrimmage of fall camp. So his first game back was Notre Dame. He had a really good game against the Irish, real quiet against SMU, but Chris Bell is another one. You look at their offensively, it sounds like they could do anything they want at will, but that's kind of where, the defense has its issues, offense as well. They've had multiple drives where all of a sudden a holding penalty draws it back, or they'll give up a sack for 20 yards, and they've been killing themselves a lot offensively, or they would be averaging more points than they are. But still a lot of things to figure out. But yeah, you're right. A lot of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball.
And, I mentioned that Virginia's going to be a little thin on the secondary. Earlier in the show, we talked about injuries for Virginia, like Antonio Clary is expected to be out, one of their best DBs. When you look at Louisville, any key injuries that they're coming into this game with?
Yeah, and that's another thing that's been, if it wasn't for the miscues, I think this would have a larger spotlight. But all conference corner Quincy Riley, he's still questionable. Not really sure when he can return. I watched him work out against Notre Dame. You could see him grimacing, and the same thing with SMU. It sounds like he just wasn't able to get through the pain that he still has on a high ankle sprain. So he could be back. Destel, and a really important cog right in the middle of Louisville's defensive line. He was out last game. He's still questionable going into this game. And they've already lost Maurice Turner, who was supposed to be their starting running back this year. Jaden Thompson, a wide receiver who is off to a stellar start. He's gone for the year. An offensive lineman, Monroe Mills, a transfer. He came over Texas Tech where he protected Tyler Shuck there. He went down in this last game. It sounds like he may be out for an extended period of time too. So the injury bug is starting to come up and step up in areas that were supposed to be strengths for Louisville, which is the secondary and the offensive line and defensive line. So they're taking some hits as well as not performing to the level that everybody expected them to.
So coming into this game, what do you feel is the biggest keys on Louisville's side?
Yeah, Louisville, I think I kind of agree with Jeff Brom. They just need to clean themselves up. On defensively, they've got to be a little bit more aggressive. We've seen them be aggressive, but it's kind of been a roller coaster. And obviously, they've got to contain a mobile quarterback. They've got to be able to prove that they can do that. And a great start for them would be to not let Virginia score on its opening drive. Louisville had I think it was 22, 23 straight games where they didn't allow an opponent to score on their opening drive, and now they've done so in their last two. So they've really got to come out and not allow the opponent to have that hot start. And I think if they could do that, that'll boost some confidence defensively. And offensively, they just got to come out and stop shooting themselves in the foot and take advantage of some of the secondary injuries that Virginia may have.
I know you, in the beginning of our conversation, you said you didn't agree with how big of the spread was coming into this week. But what do you think a reasonable prediction is for this game?
I haven't made my prediction yet, but going off of history and Louisville struggles right now, and I think Virginia is surprising some teams. I think, if I were making my prediction right now, I'd probably have Louisville in a lower scoring game by a field goal, 4 points, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look forward to it. And hopefully we've got a great game on Saturday.
For Michael for joining us on the show. We get to learn a little bit more about the Cardinals, get to learn a little bit more about what is expected when Virginia takes the field on Saturday. It's always good to get their perspective. And we'll have more details on Louisville. Jody Debling, which is also another great writer over at Cardinal Authority. He answered our 5 questions on Wahoo's 24/7. So if you want to get a little bit more detail from Jody Debling, including injuries and things like that of that nature, head over to Wahoo's 24/7. That will be on written form. So if you wanted to kind of go back and check out his opinion, you can go there. He kind of joined Michael in being that it's a close game. He chose Louisville for a touchdown. And like I kind of mentioned, Michael, I've been going back and forth on this. If you had asked me prior to Antonio Clary's injury, I was going to pick Virginia to win the game, and I'm still likely going to pick. I'm still going to pick Virginia to win the game. I think. I've been thinking. I kind of put myself on the spot in the recording the podcast because I've been going back and forth, and I guess I just wanted to make the decision as I was recording. And I think Virginia can sneak out a win. I'm kind of agreeing on Michael. It'll be a field goal type of situation. I think Virginia has the talent. I think if Louisville had a run game, I would have been a little bit more concerned, kind of what I said earlier in the game, in the podcast. But I give the slight edge to Virginia because they're at home. The only thing that I am worried about when it comes to this team this season is the roller coaster. So after Wake Forest comeback win, they came out flat against Maryland. So you're having another situation where you come back win. So you're hoping they don't do that again by coming up flat. And I even asked Tony Elliott, he's like, we have a 24-hour rule. So you have to, by Monday, you're going to have to focus on the new team. This is their chance to prove that they can do this on this scale right now. But that's something that they have not been. We've said they've answered a lot of things that we had questions coming into the season. That is the one question I still have, is that if they can handle success. So that's football. But before I get going, this is going to be just a quick takeaways. Obviously, this is a very football focused podcast. But I did want to mention that Virginia did have both a men and women's basketball scrimmage last weekend, along with that Boston College game that we have both sights and sounds there. So quickly, because we're going to have a more focused basketball podcast coming out on the bye week, since Virginia will be on the bye week 1 week prior to the basketball season, where I'm going to have a big basketball podcast where we can kind of break down a lot of the basketball previews and also kind of our takeaways from the closed scrimmages, what we're hearing, and also the latest on Cam Ward, since he is expected to announce that week. He's the forward target that Virginia has after Trey Singleton committed to Northwestern. And leading into the Michigan State visit last week, it seemed like Virginia was getting some momentum there. So all that information will be coming in that week during the bye week. So for this, one of the interesting thing is you're looking at possible lineups, right? But I think what you see from the scrimmage from Saturday is that, I mean, Tony Annett was playing with different potential starters. And I think what you're seeing is that Isaac McNeely will definitely be a sure starter. I think everyone knows that just because of his ability to hit the three-pointer. But then you saw Elijah Saunders, and I think you'll definitely say, like, that's a guy that can really help this team. Will be probably another guy that will likely be one of the starters. But I think Ishan Sharma has, one of the guys that you thought could possibly be a redshirt candidate. But then now you're saying, he's probably going to get more minutes than expected, and probably would be part of the lineup. And then, talking to sources, and I think I even mentioned this on one of my Caps Confidential on Wahoo's 24/7's board, that believe that he could contribute a little bit earlier than expected. So I expect like Saunders, Sharma, and Blake Buchanan will be the guys to get some minutes. And it'll be interesting, the battle that you're going to see with guys, like Worley. Where does he fit in there? You notice when you watch them, there's like a diverse scores on the team. And although there's been a lot of talk of different offense, I think the scheme is basically the same. But I think you saw that there was an actual decision-making that you're going to push that ball quicker up the floor. It seemed like it was a little bit, the pace picked up a little bit. So that was definitely something that kind of sparked a little bit of my notice when I watched back the video from Sounds and Sounds. So yeah, from Sharma, obviously a guy that's going to have minutes. You saw him. Saunders is one that stood out too. You saw that the offense was picking up the pace a little bit on the floor. You saw free throws going in. So it looks like free throw shooting has improved. You saw the shooter distribution was better. You saw that they were actively looking for the better shot rather than just taking a shot that just didn't make sense. So you saw that. So you also saw the potential of TJ Power and what that might look like with Isaac McNeely. So you have a lot of good takeaways from Virginia's basketball scrimmage. And again, we're going to have a lot more in-depth coverage coming up in, I guess it's 3 weeks now to the bye week. So you have Louisville, Clemson, UNC. So in 3 weeks, we're going to do a full hour show where I'm going to be talking not only Virginia basketball, but Virginia women's basketball, since they also held their scrimmage. And not only do they bring talent back, but I think they did a good job of adding some key pieces. Now, I was really intrigued about Peyton Dunbar. She was probably one of the players, freshman players, that really stood out to me. She did a really good job there, and she was among the starting lineup. And also Odessa Noyan. Odessa was really one that I feel like during that scrimmage showed a expanded role. Last year I think she averaged just under 3 points a game, but she did a good job offensively there. So I think her, Kimora Johnson, Olivia McGee will probably three women that you'll see more coming for next season. But again, we'll do a more in-depth coverage of both the men's and women's basketball teams during that week. We'll also have media day as well with both teams prior to that podcast. So we'll also have interviews available for that podcast as well. So for today's episode, we're going to just leave it at that. Again, we'll have full coverage of Virginia football's game against Louisville coming up on Saturday. Then obviously we'll have the Clemson game right after. We'll also have recruiting coverage. We're still talking to kids that visited for Virginia football's game against Boston College. We'll have visitors coming in this weekend. I'm also looking to have a special guest for the show next week. A very popular recruit is hopefully coming in next week on the show. So that will also be something that we are planning. So a lot of stuff coming. And obviously, if you want to continue to follow on, you can follow on us here on Twitter and also subscribe to us on Wahoo's 24/7. But for right now, I hope you guys have a good rest of your Thursday, and I hope you guys have a good weekend.